Okay, first, sorry for my very naive interpretation of Hegel's subjective logic, but I will try to connect it with my interpretation of Wittgenstein, my very selective interpretation of one aspect which I found in, which I think is very interesting in Wittgenstein. So this is what I found in Wittgenstein, what I call paradigmatic thinking. That means involving paradigms in our epistemic activities. And what is a paradigm? Paradigm is now in my interpretation, in my definition, not Wittgenstein's, a material object together with the praxis of applying this object in a given situation. And I call the object of a paradigm a paradigmatic sample. Object is meant very broadly here, like in a Quinian sense. Paradigmatic samples are real material things ranging in Wittgenstein from clearly defined objects like the meter stick or a color plate to intricate material structures like formalizations of mathematical proofs or works of art. A paradigmatic sample is a model of a situation, what Wittgenstein calls model in his early notebooks, or an image built in the Tractatus. Paradigm is a model together with a method of its projection, or rather a method of comparison. I would like to place emphasis on the method rather than on the object. A paradigm of X is a praxis or a method that involves material objects and a method of deciding whether a given object is or isn't an X. This is typically done by comparing the paradigmatic sample with the given object. This might be done indirectly. Let's say X may be defined by a reference to Y, which is in turn defined by resorting to a paradigmatic sample. Wittgenstein wrote on many occasions that colors, concepts, and standards of measures are introduced by means of paradigmatic samples, the standard sepia, the standard meter. The same is true of numerals, like the concept for numbers. We can give a meaning to a number, to number 3 by the following definition. The list of 3 strokes is defined. The list of 3 strokes means number 3. The list of 3 strokes serves here in this sense as a yardstick. I argued in my book, Wittgenstein on Internal and External Relations, that the same scheme applies in a number of other domains. There are, for example, paradigmatic mathematical proofs and paradigmatical works of art. Furthermore, the standard of length can be introduced and defined by a paradigmatic sample, the standard meter in Paris, or by the help of other physical constants like the speed of light, which are defined in the end by paradigmatic samples like a beam of light. Wittgenstein didn't say that this scheme is in any way universal. That means that every concept is introduced by a paradigm which refers to a paradigmatic sample. I would like to put forward a rather controversial claim that Wittgenstein's discussion of private language supplies an argument that we cannot do without paradigmatic samples. Wittgenstein pointed out that the idea of a private rule being inconsistent. There has been a long debate what private actually means here. If we take private to mean not referring to any outer object, like by naming my own sensation as, then the desired conclusion would follow. Of course, this is no full argument. This is only a sketch of argument. However, it's not central to my, focus of my talk here. All what I need in order to make the bridge to Hegel is the claim that paradigms play a certain role in our epistemic practices. The main claim I want to advance is that similar structure is to be found in Hegel's subjective logic. In my interpretation, I bring the subject in Hegel closer to the linguistic community in Wittgenstein. Subjective logic then becomes the logic of language games, or more broadly, a grammar in Wittgenstein's idiosyncratic sense. For Hegel, the concept, Begriff, is the fundamental structure not only of our thinking, but also of reality and the world. Hegel recognized three basic moments of the concept: universality, particularity, and singularity, or individuality. Hegel's account of the concept consists of a dialectical movement from universality to particularity and finally to individuality. Hegel also begins with this dialectical account of the concept with, and it must be stressed, an abstract universality. Universality is something that is already available from the logic of essence. Abstract universality is something presupposed, and we find an analogous presupposition in Wittgenstein's discussion of ostensive definition, where he stressed that the place or role in grammar must be already prepared in order to carry out an ostensive definition. Abstract universality, or general conception, the allgemeine Vorstellung, is characterized by neglecting particular features which would account for the specific differences among the subspecies and individuals falling under the concept in question. What is then particularity? Particularity is a determinateness, Bestimmtheit of the concept. The determinateness of universality is its difference. It is its outward difference. That means a difference between the universal and the particular. The particular is thus a negation of the universal. And Hegel says in the Science of Logic, the determinateness of the particular is simple as principle, but it is also as simple as the moment of the totality, as a determinateness opposed to the other determinateness. End of quote. So, particularity is then hence a principle of difference, the difference within the universal concept. Now, I am going to bring up two main interpretations of this difficult term of particularity. For the first interpretation, a particular is a perspective on a universal concept. That's the interpretation. Advocated by Slavoj Žižek. Here. A particular is a specific historical appearance of a universal. For the second interpretation, particular is an undifferentiated example. That's the interpretation advocated by Winfield, but also by many others. The problem with the first interpretation is that it doesn't account for the difference between the universal concept. The only difference available is that between different subjective and historical perspective on the universal concept. The particular is, however, the, let's say, first negation of the universal. It is something what the universal is not. It is a subjective position on something is not necessarily its negation. The problem with the second interpretation is that an example always exemplifies either too little or too much. Examples are either imperfect to capture an ideal universality, or they, and possibly at the same time, exemplify features that don't belong to the universal concept. The problem is that what we miss here is a perspective. In Wittgenstein would say a method of projection on the example that would determine what exactly is being exemplified. Examples thus lack the determinateness of the particular. My proposal is, so to speak, a synthesis of these two accounts of particularity. I propose to take particular as the paradigm Remember that a paradigm is a material object together with the praxis of its application. A paradigm is a sample of a paradigmatic sample of X is also an example of X, while at the same time a paradigmatic sample is different from an example. What paradigms do share with examples is that a paradigm is different from the universal concept, or more precisely, paradigm is different from abstract universality. Furthermore, an integral part of a paradigm is the praxis of comparing the paradigmatic sample with other objects and situations. And this practical trait provides us provides the particular with its determinateness, which is the principle of difference. As paradigm, the particular is a principle. This praxis is always rooted in a specific social and historical context. For Hegel, the particular is also universal and individual. Every paradigm has an individual aspect, which is the paradigmatic sample, and also an universal aspect, which is the universal dimension of the concept. Wittgenstein was worried that philosophical problems and paradoxes arise when a word or word sentence sequence is taken out of its context of use. The context of use means not only a linguistic concept, but a linguistic context, but also an extra linguistic context, the praxis with the particular expression which involves paradigms. The context of use is thus a particularization of a linguistic expression, and this is not surprising. But utilizing the elaboration above, we can attempt a stronger interpretation. Neglecting the particular moment and neglecting the context of use means, in fact, taking a language in an abstract way. And ultimately, it means failing to consider paradigmatic samples in rule-following practices, which is private rule following. We are now in a better position to characterize the two conceptions of universality, abstract and concrete. Abstract universality is devoid of any reference to a paradigmatic sample. So this is what is advocated by Alain Badiou. All true universality is devoid of center. In contrast, concrete universality, as advocated in Slavoj Žižek, bears a witness to a scar in some particularity, and always remain linked to this scar. This center, this scar, is, in my interpretation, a paradigmatic sample. Let us move further in the development of Hegel's subjective logic the concept is posited as a particular, the concept in its positive particularity is a judgment. I shall discuss judgment only in its abstract form. The universal is the individual is the universal, or the subject is the predicate. The subject is the immediately concrete, and the predicate is the abstract universal. In the judgment, both sides are being developed in order to reach a perfect identity, which is being expressed by the copula is. And this identity is, I don't mean the identity is at the beginning, but it's something which has to be reached, which has to be the outcome of the result of the judgment. The predicate is developed from the abstract universality to particularity, that means to a paradigm. The subject is developed from its immediately individuality into the particularity that has been already contained in the individual, like a seed already contains the essence of the plant. So in the judgment, this rose is red. This individual rose, which contains many particulars, color, aroma, length, is developed by a negation into one of them, into the color. Analogously, the abstract universal red is developed again by the negation into its paradigm. Now a perfect identity can be achieved when the rose is compared with the paradigmatic sample of a red as to their color. The particularized individual is identical with the paradigmatic sample, and they exchange, so they can exchange their roles. The particularized individual can become a paradigmatic sample in the original of the original universal, and the original paradigmatic sample can become again by the negation a mirror instance of the universal. And this is the exchange of meanings that happened in the judgment. It's a key, Hegel's key claim. In the subject side of the judgment, there is an inverse development from individuality to particularity and further to universality. Why the development is captured by the succession of from universality through particularity to individuality presents a series of presuppositions. The development from individuality through particularity to universality can be taken as a development of an idea and as a real, even a historical process in space and time. As we know, the concept for Hegel is a fundamental structure of thinking as well as reality. Hegel provides a good deal of examples. I have already mentioned the seed, which is developed into a plant and as a particular plant and into its species. And Hegel comments this unclosing is, as it were, the judgment of the plant. The growing of a plant is a real process that, however, does not involve thinking or language. But before proceeding to a more complex examples, we have to make sure that what is given in the subject, the immediately concrete, is initially, according to Hegel, an empty name. So today we would say a singular term or a proper name. So what we are looking for now is a development from a proper name, individuality, to a paradigm, particularity, and further to an universal term. So, and I will now go through two complex examples, and that's the death of Julius Caesar, and the second example will be the life and death of Jesus Christ, which Hegel discussed on many occasions. So, initially, Caesar was the name of an individual, let us assume. He acted in a particular way, militarily and politically, that was hostile to the Roman Republic, which, after he nominally assumed the sovereign power, he became a dictator for life. The Republic was on the verge of collapse. By his assassination, the conspirators hoped to restore the Republican regime. But the opposite happened. They brought up the end of the Republic. Caesar, being a name, familiar name, changed into the title of the Roman emperors. And the title passed into many European languages, and English is an exception here, as the universal concept designing the role of an emperor, like in German, Kaiser, or in Russian, Tsar. What we have here is a passage from the individual, Julius Caesar as a person, to the particular, Caesar's military and political way of acting, into the universal, Caesar as a title and the Caesar as a property or a role. The particular moment can be taken as a paradigm, and Hegel writes that Caesar may be taken as a paragon, in original muster, of Roman adaptation of means to ends, which means in original of Roman Zweckmäßigkeit. Caesar's military and political career is the paradigmatic case of a person that is called an emperor, or a Caesar with a lowercase c. Or, in other words, a Caesar with lowercase c is Caesar with a lowercase c is a such person whose political position is similar or comparable to Caesar with capital C. Or one final remark before we proceed to the next example. As already has been made clear, the passage from individuality to universality is marked by a series of negations. Hegel stressed that in the judgment, the individual is universal expressed, on the one hand, a perishableness of individual things, and on the other hand, their positive subsistence in the concept as such. Caesar, as an individual, has to perish, has to die, in order to be transformed into a universal concept and subsist as such. So his physical death, his assassination, triggered this transformation. And this aspect is now become more clear in my final example, and this is Jesus Christ. This example is, of course, very more complex than the previous one because of the reach of its dialectical moment. I would begin with the moment of particularity. In his very early writings, Hegel which were published as notes for folk religion from 1793, Hegel maintained that Jesus is a muster, a model of an ideal of virtue. This is precisely so because Jesus has a supplement of the divine, Beimischung, or Zusatz des Göttlichen. Otherwise, it would be only an example of a virtuous man like Socrates. Jesus had thus a divine as well as a human nature, and this double nature Hegel sees as the crucial advantage over the abstractness of older religions and ethical conceptions which neglected the moment of particularity. Moreover, Jesus was a perfect man who endured the lot of all men, as Hegel writes. Jesus, by the way, he lived and died, stands thus for all men. He is the paradigm of a Christian man. If we follow the development of the concept of God, then the universality of God the Father is particularized in Jesus the Son and finds its final stage in the individuality of the Holy Spirit. The Christian Trinity thus follows the three moments of the development of the concept. The Holy Spirit is for Hegel the universal self-consciousness of a religious community, the individual together with the consciousness of the religious community. That's a quote from the Phenomenology. The Holy Spirit thus demonstrates the moments of concrete universality as well as of particular individuality. So the passage from Jesus Christ to the Holy Spirit can be taken as the passage from particularity to individuality, or to particularity to universality, as the judgment from the individuality of the God the Father to the particularity of Jesus Christ, and finally to the universality of Holy Spirit. Now, Jesus is the negation, the first negation of the God the Father, and the Holy Spirit is the negation, or the negation of the negation of Jesus. Let us more focus on the second negation, on the negation of the negation. This negation of the negation, or as Hegel says, the death of the death, has two moments. On the one hand, it is the death of the manifested God. And Hegel says, Christ dies, but only as dead he is exalted to heaven and sits at the right hand of God. And only thus is the Spirit. The physical death of the individual of Jesus Christ is necessary to passage into the universality of the Spirit. This is analogous to the death of Caesar, after which, now Hegel says, its spiritual and inward existence was unfolded under Augustus. So Hegel clearly recognized this analogy when he opens his section of Christianity in his lecture on the philosophy of history. So on the other hand, the negation of the negation is the negation of this death. It is the death of the death. It is God's preservation through his resurrection. God rises into life again. Curiously enough, Hegel maintained that Christ Jesus Christ's human nature is also preserved. Moreover, the death of the dead is the highest preservation and elevation of his human nature, not only his divine nature. I am almost to conclude. The negation of the particular involves the negation of its individual moment. Caesar or Jesus must necessarily have died in order to pass over into the concrete universality. If the particular moment is a paradigm, then its individual moment is a paradigmatic sample. Hegel thus maintained that the paradigmatic sample has to disappear. This position doesn't seem to me to be very plausible. For instance, the standard meter doesn't need to be destroyed in order to establish the meter as the universal unit of length. Quite on the contrary. The standard meter must be preserved, for it must be available for comparing with other objects. This praxis makes up the universal unit. A paradigmatic sample is thus a prototype which can be copied, but this doesn't need to lead. This doesn't not lead to its destroying this sample. So how can we make sense of Hegel's position? And that's my final point. The paradigmatic sample of X can be used to produce and concrete instances of X. These instances make up the concrete universal. We can ask, however, whether the paradigmatic sample of X is part of this concrete universal. It is. So, is the paradigmatic sample of X and X, or is the standard meter 1 meter long, or was Caesar with capital C a Caesar with lowercase c? Such questions are, however, paradoxical, and Wittgenstein says very clearly in the philosophical investigation, the only thing of which one can say neither that is 1 meter long nor that it is not 1 meter long, and that is the standard meter in Paris. So, and he makes analogous claims about other paradigmatic samples. So we cannot decide whether the paradigmatic sample of X is a part of X. If one cannot say that the standard meter is 1 meter long, then this combination of words has no sense. And such, Wittgenstein advises us, such a combination of words is being excluded from the language, withdrawn from circulation. So the structure of the paradigmatic sample is neither a being in the universal, not being excluded from the universal, and this is the structure of Hegel's sublation, Aufhebung. The paradigm is not quite a part of the universal, but it's at the same time preserved in the universal. So the paradigm is not an individual moment of the universal, but it's particular moment. So following Hegel's logic, paradigmatic sample get destroyed in the course of the negation of negation. The sample as a material object cannot be, knowingly or by mistake, asked whether it belongs to the universal concept. The sample as such is simply not there anymore. We cannot confuse Caesar with a Kaiser, because the concept came into the existence after Caesar, necessarily after Caesar's death, and he will never come back to life, let us assume. This situation is different with Jesus Christ. According to the Christian doctrine, he will return on the judgment day, the last judgment, and resurrect all men, including Julius Caesar. Jesus' second coming doesn't fit into Hegel's dialectic, and this is no surprise that Hegel never paid attention to the apocalypse and to the last judgment in his treatment of Christianity. So, thank you for your attention.